The year is 1938, the place Halifax, England. A bustling town, known for its industry and hard-working people. But a shadow is about to fall over Halifax, a shadow of fear and uncertainty. It begins with whispers, rumors of a strange and dangerous presence lurking in the shadows. A young woman reports being attacked. She describes a shadowy figure wielding a razor-sharp weapon. Her story is chilling, but is it true? Or is it the start of something far more insidious? The woman's story spreads like wildfire through Halifax. People are scared. The once peaceful town is now gripped by fear and paranoia. Every shadow seems menacing, every stranger a potential threat. The air is thick with tension as neighbors exchange worried glances and hurried whispers. The sense of community that once bound the townspeople together is now fraying at the edges, replaced by suspicion and dread. The newspapers pick up the story, and soon, the whole town is talking about the Halifax Slasher. Headlines scream of the terror that has descended upon Halifax, and the sensational stories only add fuel to the fire. The media frenzy creates an atmosphere of hysteria, with each new report more alarming than the last. People devour every word, desperate for any information that might help them understand the horror unfolding around them. The attacker is always described as a shadowy figure. Elusive and ghost-like, he seems to vanish into thin air after each attack. Witnesses speak of a man cloaked in darkness, his face obscured, moving with an eerie silence. The mystery of his identity only deepens the fear, as no one knows who he is or where he might strike next. The townspeople are left to wonder if the attacker is even human at all. Some say it is a ghost, seeking revenge. Legends of restless spirits and haunted places are woven into the fabric of Halifax's history, and the idea of a vengeful ghost resonates with the frightened townspeople. They speak in hushed tones of past wrongs and ancient curses, of spirits that cannot find peace. The ghostly theory offers a chilling explanation for the inexplicable attacks, adding a supernatural element to the already terrifying events. Others whisper about escaped lunatics and criminals on the run. The police are baffled. Theories abound, each more outlandish than the last. Some believe the attacker is a madman who has escaped from an asylum driven by a twisted desire to harm. Others think it might be a criminal seeking revenge or simply a thrill. The police, overwhelmed by the sheer number of possibilities, struggle to make sense of the chaos. Their frustration grows as each lead turns into a dead end. They have no leads, no suspects. The investigation stalls as the police find themselves chasing shadows. Each crime scene offers little in the way of clues, and the attacker leaves no trace behind. The detectives are left with an empty board, their minds racing to connect the dots that simply aren't there. The lack of progress only heightens the sense of helplessness and fear among the townspeople. The attacks seem random, targeting men and women, young and old. No one feels safe as the attacker shows no pattern or preference. The randomness of the violence means that anyone could be next, and this unpredictability keeps everyone on edge. Families huddle together at night, doors locked and windows barred, praying that they won't be the next victims. The sense of vulnerability is pervasive, affecting every aspect of daily life. The only thing connecting them is the weapon, a razor, or some other sharp object. The brutality of the attacks is shocking, with the razor becoming a symbol of the terror that has gripped Halifax. Each new incident brings fresh horror, as the townspeople are forced to confront the reality of the violence in their midst. The razor, once a mundane tool, is now a harbinger of fear, its gleaming blade a reminder of the danger that lurks in the shadows. As days turn into weeks, the attacks continue. More people come forward claiming to be victims of the Halifax Slasher. Each story is more terrifying than the last. Some describe being attacked in broad daylight. Others say the slasher broke into their homes at night. The people of Halifax are living in fear. They are afraid to walk the streets alone, especially at night. Parents are afraid to let their children out of their sight. The atmosphere in Halifax is electric with fear. People are suspicious of each other. They see shadows lurking in every corner. Rumors and speculation run rampant. Everyone has a theory about the identity of the Halifax Slasher. The police increase their patrols. They urge people to be vigilant, to report any suspicious activity, but the attacks continue, and the fear in Halifax intensifies. Section 5. The police respond, a city on high alert. The police are under immense pressure to catch the Halifax Slasher. They set up roadblocks. They interview hundreds of people, but the slasher remains elusive. The lack of progress fuels the public's fear and frustration. The police begin to question the validity of some of the reports. Some victims have minor injuries, others none at all. Could it be that some people are exaggerating their stories, caught up in the mass hysteria? Section 6. Was it mass hysteria? Psychologists begin to suggest that mass hysteria might be playing a role in the Halifax Slasher case. Mass hysteria is a phenomenon where fear and anxiety spread rapidly through a population, often leading to irrational behavior. Could it be that some of the attacks were not real, but rather products of people's heightened fear and anxiety? The idea of mass hysteria is a controversial one, but it offers a possible explanation for the bizarre events in Halifax. Section 7. The case unravels, doubts and discrepancies. As the police investigate further, they begin to find inconsistencies in the victims' stories. The initial report seemed straightforward, but as more details emerged, the narrative started to fall apart. Officers meticulously combed through every piece of evidence, hoping to find a thread that would tie everything together. However, the more they dug, the more discrepancies they uncovered. Some details don't add up. Witnesses contradict each other. In the heat of the moment, people's memories can be unreliable, but the level of contradiction was unusual. One witness claimed to have seen a shadowy figure, while another insisted there was no one there. The police were left puzzled, trying to piece together a coherent story from these conflicting accounts. The police start to suspect that some of the victims might be faking their attacks, either for attention or out of fear and anxiety. The pressure of the investigation weighed heavily on everyone involved. Officers began to notice that some injuries seemed self-inflicted, and the behavior of certain individuals raised red flags. The line between genuine victims and those seeking attention became increasingly blurred. The turning point comes when one of the victims confesses to fabricating their story. This confession sent shockwaves through the community. The individual admitted to making up the attack, driven by a mix of fear and the desire to be part of the unfolding drama. This revelation forced the police to reevaluate the entire case, questioning the validity of other testimonies. They admit to inflicting minor injuries on themselves, swept up in the panic that had gripped Halifax. The atmosphere of fear and uncertainty had created a fertile ground for such actions. People were desperate for answers, and in their desperation some resorted to extreme measures. The police now faced the daunting task of sifting through the chaos to find the truth, knowing that not everything was as it seemed. Section 8. The Phantom Menace Exposed. In the quiet town of Halifax, a series of mysterious events had gripped the community in fear. The so-called Halifax Slasher had become a household name, a phantom menace that seemed to strike without warning. The town was on edge, with every shadow and every creak of the floorboards sending shivers down the spines of its residents. The confession sets off a chain reaction. It all began when one of the supposed victims came forward, admitting that their story was fabricated. This revelation was like a spark in a dry forest, igniting a series of confessions from others who had claimed to be attacked by the slasher. The police were inundated with new information, each confession adding to the growing realization that something was amiss. More and more victims come forward, admitting that their stories were not entirely true. The atmosphere in Halifax shifted from one of fear to one of confusion and disbelief. How could so many people have been mistaken? The police interviews revealed a pattern of exaggeration and hysteria, with each new confession painting a clearer picture of the mass delusion that had taken hold of the town. The police conclude that there was never a Halifax Slasher. After thorough investigations and countless interviews, the authorities reached a startling conclusion. The Halifax Slasher was a figment of the collective imagination. There was no evidence of a serial attacker, no physical proof to support the claims of the supposed victims. The entire episode was a case study in the power of fear and suggestion. The phantom menace that had terrorized Halifax for weeks was nothing more than a product of fear, rumor, and mass hysteria. The newspapers that had once fueled the panic now reported on the unraveling of the myth. Headlines that once screamed of danger and terror now spoke of relief and introspection. The town had to come to terms with the fact that they had been their own worst enemy. The news comes as a relief to some, but for others, it is a bitter pill to swallow. While many were glad to learn that there was no real threat, Others struggled with the idea that they had been duped. The sense of betrayal was palpable, as people grappled with the realization that their fear had been unfounded. Conversations in pubs and on street corners were dominated by debates about how such a mass hysteria could have taken root. Some people refused to believe that the attacks were not real. Despite the overwhelming evidence, there were those who clung to their beliefs. They argued that the police had missed something, that the slasher was still out there, lurking in the shadows. These skeptics found it difficult to let go of the narrative that had dominated their lives for weeks. They clung to their stories, convinced that the slasher was real. For these individuals, the myth of the Halifax Slasher had become a part of their identity. They defended their stories with fervor, unwilling to accept that they had been part of a collective delusion. The town of Halifax was left to navigate the complex aftermath of the hysteria, as it slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Section 9. The Legacy of the Halifax Slasher. The Halifax Slasher case remains a fascinating example of how fear and anxiety can spread through a population, leading to bizarre and unpredictable behavior. It serves as a reminder of the power of suggestion and the importance of critical thinking, even in the face of fear. Though the Halifax Slasher was never caught, the legend lives on in Halifax, a chilling reminder of the time when fear gripped the town,